They told me to work harder, save smarter, and invest better. But nobody told me that money has a spirit. Nobody warned me that you can be financially stable and still spiritually bankrupt. I did everything right according to the world's system, yet something invisible kept draining what I earned. It wasn't bad math, it was bad mindset, a curse I didn't even know existed. For years, I thought I had a financial problem. What I really had was a faith problem. I was tithing with fear, sowing with doubt, and praying without strategy. I believed in God but still trusted my calculator more than his promises. I thought discipline alone could replace divine direction, until I hit the point where both my wallet and my hope were empty. That's when everything changed. Not through a seminar, not through a stock tip, but through a single Bible verse that exposed every financial lie I'd ever believed. A verse I had read 100 times before but never truly heard. It didn't just increase my income, it restored my identity. That's the moment my business stopped being a burden and became a blessing. I'll be honest, this verse didn't just fix my budget, it fixed my belief system. It redefined what it means to make money God's way, to prosper without guilt, and to multiply without manipulation. And today I want to share exactly how that happened. Because if it broke my financial curse, it can break yours too. If you like our content, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. So before you scroll away, stay with me. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't a prosperity trick or a motivational speech. It's a hidden law that's been sitting in your Bible all along, waiting for you to activate it. The financial curse I didn't know I was under. I used to believe that working harder was the only way out. More hours, more exhaustion, more late nights at the desk. Yet somehow, less peace. Every payday felt like a brief breath before the cycle began again. Bills, debt, anxiety. It wasn't that money wasn't coming in. It was that it was leaving faster than it arrived, like a leaky bucket. I didn't realize then that this wasn't just a financial issue. It was a spiritual one. There's a verse in Haggai 1:6 that says, "You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it." That was me making money, losing money, chasing money. The more I tried to control it, the more it slipped away. My business ideas failed not because they lacked potential, but because they lacked divine alignment. I was fighting a battle in the material world that was actually rooted in the unseen. Most people live under that same curse without realizing it. They keep trying to make money without understanding the true provision doesn't begin with labor. It begins with revelation. They think the problem is inflation or opportunity, but the real problem is misplaced trust. Money isn't the issue, mindset is. The curse hides behind habits, fear, doubt, and impatience disguised as hustle. I remember nights when I prayed for breakthrough but budgeted like a man with no faith. I tithed, but I didn't trust. I prayed, but I panicked. Every unexpected bill felt like punishment. Every investment loss felt like rejection. Yet God wasn't punishing me. He was pruning me. The loss wasn't destruction. It was divine correction. My system had to collapse before it could be rebuilt. It's a strange feeling when you realize you've been building your financial house on sand. Jesus warned about that in Matthew 7:26. Working without spiritual foundation is like constructing success on shifting soil. It looks solid until the storm hits. The financial storm hit me, and every false belief crumbled. Only then could truth take root. And in that broken moment, when the numbers didn't add up and the business account was empty, something unexpected happened. I opened the Bible, not looking for money advice, but for mercy. And that's when I saw it. The verse that changed everything. The day I found the verse that changed everything. It wasn't a Sunday sermon or a YouTube preacher that led me there. It was desperation. I had exhausted every business plan, every loan, every make money quick strategy. My faith was hanging by a thread. I remember praying, "God, I don't need motivation. I need direction." And then, like light cutting through fog, I landed on Proverbs 10:22. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth, without painful toil for it. I had read it before, but this time it felt like God was reading it to me. That verse dismantled years of wrong theology in one moment. I realized I'd been living as if I was the source of my own success. I worked like everything depended on me, and prayed like nothing did. But this verse reversed the equation. It taught me that money without blessing is just survival. But blessing turns survival into overflow. Business isn't cursed when it's surrendered. That revelation didn't make money appear overnight, but it shifted everything inside me. I stopped treating prayer like a spare tire and started treating it like the steering wheel. I stopped begging God to bless my plans and started asking Him for His. It wasn't about make money anymore. It was about make purpose profitable. That mindset changed the way I approached every deal, every investment, every goal. The first sign that something was different wasn't in my bank account. It was in my peace. Anxiety used to visit daily. Now it had no address to return to. The same clients who had gone silent started reaching out again. Opportunities that felt random started to align like dominoes. I began to see a divine pattern behind what I once called luck. Most people underestimate how spiritual money really is. It's not just a number. It's a mirror. It reflects what you trust. That day, I stopped trusting in hustle and started trusting in harmony. With God, with wisdom, with timing. And once my mindset caught up with heaven's order, the flow began to change direction. But that was just the beginning. The verse didn't only promise blessing, it demanded transformation. To walk in that blessing, I had to be reprogrammed from the inside out. How God reprogrammed my mind about money. Back then, I didn't realize how deep the programming ran. Money wasn't just something I used, it was something that used me. Every decision, every late-night worry, every comparison came from a script I didn't even know I was following. Somewhere along the way, I had absorbed the lie that making money was a struggle, and that struggle somehow made me righteous. But God began to rewrite that belief line by line, not with theory, but through experience. The first verse He pressed into my heart was Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It hit me that God doesn't fix your finances before He fixes your thinking. I realized that poverty isn't always about lack. Sometimes it's about loyalty to the wrong system. I was loyal to hustle, addicted to control, and allergic to rest. But wealth, I learned, begins with rest, the kind that trusts God enough to stop striving. I remember one morning I looked at my calendar, packed with meetings, calls, endless tasks, and asked, if I'm this busy, why am I not fruitful? That question was the start of my reprogramming. God showed me that busyness was my badge of pride, not my measure of progress. I wasn't managing a business. The business was managing me. I had made productivity my idol. That day, I started canceling what didn't align with peace. It was strange at first. Saying no felt irresponsible. Slowing down felt dangerous. But that's how I learned what true stewardship looks like. Doing less, but doing what matters. I began applying biblical logic to practical areas. Instead of chasing 10 clients, I focused on serving 2 with excellence. Instead of trying to make money fast, I started making value consistent. It didn't just change my finances, it changed my faith. Soon, I began to see God's fingerprints in small daily details. The moment I stopped hoarding, I started receiving. The moment I stopped complaining, I started creating. Even the market, unpredictable as it was, began to favor my patience. Deals that once collapsed suddenly held. Clients who had ignored my offers before now called back. Nothing had changed on paper, but everything had changed in perspective. And that's when I understood something most people miss. God doesn't bless confusion. He blesses clarity. When your mind is aligned with heaven, your money stops rebelling against you. But there was still one more revelation to come. One that would turn these lessons into a clear, repeatable principle I now call the 5-to-1 rule. The 5-to-1 rule, the principle that multiplied everything. I didn't come up with the 5-to-1 rule overnight. It came through trial, failure, and revelation. One morning, while reviewing my finances and praying over my business, I sensed God whisper, "You've been managing addition, not multiplication." That moment shifted me from survival math to kingdom math. I started noticing a divine pattern. Every breakthrough I had came when I gave 5 times more energy, faith, or generosity toward purpose than I gave to consumption or comfort. So I began living by a principle. For every 1 part I spend on myself, I must invest 5 parts into what builds, blesses, or multiplies. If I spent an hour scrolling, I had to spend 5 learning. If I earned $100, I'd find a way to reinvest $50 into skill, $30 into giving, $10 into savings, and only $10 into fleeting pleasure. It wasn't about legalism, it was about leverage. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance." Diligence, I learned, isn't speed, it's structure. I saw the 5-to-1 pattern all over Scripture. Joseph stored 5 times more grain than others during the years of plenty. David trained more hours than he fought. Even Jesus spent the majority of his time preparing for a ministry that lasted only 3 years. Heaven itself operates on the principle of overflow, investing heavily in what seems small until it transforms everything. The 5-to-1 rule was my way of syncing my wallet with that rhythm. When I applied it, everything started to change. Suddenly, I wasn't chasing make-money opportunities. I was building purpose systems. My business stopped being a hustle and became a ministry. I gave more freely, saved more consistently, and somehow still had more left over. What I discovered was that generosity doesn't reduce your net worth. It reveals your real worth. Friends asked how I was growing when the economy was shrinking. I told them, because I stopped working for money and started letting money work for mission. That shift flipped the script. I became more strategic, tracking not just expenses but purpose allocation. Every dollar had an assignment. Every investment had a reason beyond return. That's when make money became make impact. Looking back, the 5-to-1 rule wasn't just a financial formula. It was a faith framework. It built discipline, tested priorities, and exposed idols. It trained my heart to serve, not to hoard. But the real transformation came when I started subtracting something else, the habits that silently drained my blessing. What I stopped doing and what started multiplying. At some point, God made it clear that my next level wouldn't come from adding new habits, but from subtracting toxic ones. I had to stop doing what looked productive but produced nothing. I stopped saying yes to everything that made me busy but not fruitful. I stopped chasing quick returns that never aligned with my purpose, and maybe most importantly, I stopped measuring success by how much money I made and started measuring it by how much peace I kept. I stopped idolizing the word hustle. For years, that word had been my badge of honor, a way to prove I was serious about business. But I realized that constant motion doesn't always mean progress. I used to wake up anxious, check my phone, scroll through other people's wins and call it motivation. Now, I start my mornings in silence. No notifications, just direction. I learned that clarity earns more than chaos. Then I stopped negotiating with fear. I used to let fear decide how much I'd invest, how I'd spend, even what ideas I'd attempt. Fear disguised itself as wisdom, whispering, "Be careful," every time I felt bold. But faith is careful too, just in a different way. It carefully obeys, even when logic can't explain it. When I stopped letting fear forecast my finances, doors I never imagined started opening. Clients came out of nowhere, ideas started flowing again, and peace became my new currency. I also stopped working with people who didn't share values, because shared vision matters more than shared profits. I had to learn that not every partnership is divine. Some are distractions in disguise. A good deal can still be a bad direction. Proverbs 13:20 reminded me, walk with the wise and become wise. So I began aligning myself with builders, not beggars, with mentors, not manipulators. That change alone multiplied my momentum. Another thing I stopped doing was praying for harvests I hadn't planted. I used to beg God for results while refusing to sow consistency. I'd skip the process and expect divine exception. But God doesn't bless shortcuts. He blesses systems. The moment I became consistent in sowing time, tithes, and discipline, blessings became consistent too. That's when I learned. Miracles often travel through management, and finally I stopped doubting my calling. The enemy loves to whisper that your business isn't spiritual, that your work doesn't matter to heaven. But the moment I embraced that my mission to make money with integrity was divine, everything multiplied. God doesn't bless what you fake. He blesses what you fully own. And when I began owning that calling, I stepped into a season I called divine acceleration. From broke to overflow, the season of divine acceleration. When the shift began, it was almost invisible. There were no flashing signs, no lottery-like miracle, just small wins that started stacking up. A late invoice suddenly paid, a forgotten contact reaching out, a business idea that had been stagnant for months suddenly gaining traction. It felt as though heaven had adjusted its timing and I was finally in sync. What I had been grinding for years to accomplish started happening with half the effort. Not because I worked less, but because I worked aligned. This was the season of divine acceleration. I used to think overflow was about abundance of money, but it was really about abundance of movement. When everything that once resisted you begins to cooperate. Clients came without cold calls. Opportunities found me instead of me chasing them. It was as if the same God who multiplied loaves and fishes had stepped into my spreadsheets. Suddenly, what was barely enough became more than sufficient, and I remember realizing something crucial. God doesn't rush, but when He moves, He redeems time. Joel 2:25 says, I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. I felt that restoration in my finances, my health, and even my faith. I started sleeping again, not out of exhaustion, but peace. My prayers shifted from "Lord, please bless this" to "Lord, teach me to steward this." That's when the real transformation started. I won't pretend it was effortless. Acceleration still requires obedience. There were moments when pride tried to return, when I wanted to take credit for the progress. But every time I did, God reminded me that the speed wasn't proof of my skill. It was proof of His favor. I began journaling every breakthrough, big or small, and it amazed me how often divine timing had replaced human striving. From that point, money stopped being the main goal and became a measurement of impact. The same platforms I once used for self-promotion became tools for ministry. I spoke less about profits and more about purpose, and somehow both grew. The more I gave, the more I gained, not because of some mystical law, but because generosity keeps you from becoming a prisoner of your own prosperity. It's surreal looking back, how a single verse transformed not only my bank account but my belief system. The curse broke the day I stopped seeing myself as broke. And now, what I call overflow isn't measured by commas, but by calling. Because the true wealth God gave me next wasn't something I could count, the wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Looking back now, I realize the greatest deposit God ever made in my life wasn't in my account. It was in my understanding. For so long, I chased the kind of success you could screenshot, post, or brag about. But true prosperity is quieter. It's the peace of waking up without panic, the joy of giving without fear, and the wisdom of knowing when enough is truly enough. The older me finally understood that money is a tool, but purpose is the treasury. I started noticing that the wealthiest people I met weren't always the richest. Some had businesses worth millions, but homes filled with tension. Others had modest means but carried a serenity no stock portfolio could buy. Proverbs 3:16 says, "Long life is in her right hand. In her left are riches and honor." Real wisdom gives both, the tangible and the eternal. The key is learning not to trade one for the other. That's when I began redefining ROI, return on influence instead of return on investment. I asked myself, who is becoming better because I prospered? If my business grew, but my soul shrank, that wasn't blessing. That was bankruptcy in disguise. So I started mentoring others, teaching biblical money principles and reminding people that make money isn't evil. It's holy when it's done honestly and used redemptively. Freedom became my favorite currency. I built my schedule around values, not vanity. I stopped competing and started collaborating. The same markets that once felt cutthroat became mission fields. Even the way I viewed failure changed. I no longer called it loss, but tuition. Every bad investment was just a course in divine economics, paid in experience. That mindset gave me a wealth no market crash could erase. Now, when I pray over my finances, I don't ask God to make me rich. I ask Him to make me reliable. Because wealth without wisdom is just weight. He can only trust abundance to hands that won't worship it. And the more I trusted Him with what I had, the more He trusted me with what I didn't. That's the paradox of a kingdom business. You gain by letting go. So when people ask what really broke my financial curse, I tell them it wasn't the money that changed. It was me. The verse wasn't a spell, it was a mirror. It showed me who I was and who I was meant to become. And that's the real secret. Once you learn to manage what can't be measured, everything else multiplies on its own. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't just about money. It was about mindset, mission, and maturity. God never wanted you to live broke. He wanted you to live whole. You were never called to chase money. You were called to manage miracles. Every principle, every verse, every moment of pruning was meant to teach you how to turn pressure into purpose. Now the question is, what will you do with what you've learned? Will you keep managing your business by sight or start managing it by faith? Will you keep asking God to bless your plans or start asking Him for His? The truth is, breakthrough begins the moment obedience replaces opinion, and the wealth you're praying for might already be waiting on the wisdom you've been avoiding. God isn't finished multiplying you, but He can't grow what you won't surrender. So take the steps. Apply the 5-to-1 rule, realign your priorities, and stop calling survival a blessing. You were designed for overflow. The same verse that broke my curse can rebuild your confidence, your calling, and your capacity to make money with purpose. Write in the comments, "I break every financial curse over my life." and watch how this powerful declaration begins to shift the course of your business and your finances from this day forward. If this message spoke to you, don't just listen, act on it. Let this be the moment where belief turns into blueprint. Prosperity isn't about luck, it's about alignment. God's already given you the map, now walk in it. And if this word touched your heart, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. Subscribe to Daily Grace, and turn on notifications so you never miss another teaching that helps you build your faith, your business, and your future. God's way.